Микрофон. Не знал, что. So, all right, I guess we shall be starting right now. Now, please just let me know if you can hear and see me properly. Thank you, Malvina. Elena, thank you. Natalia, okay. So Evgeny is here. We've got one more, Elena. Okay.
How are you?
Okay, Evgeny. Okay, thank you. So probably we better start because it is 1 p.m. already. So today we've got a short webinar on the topic how to train critical thinking skills. Okay, I will comment on this topic a little bit later because I have several ideas what is wrong here in this specific statement. I see Peter has joined us and Betka. Hello. Okay, so and today here with me is my friend and colleague Evgeny Volkov. So could you please appear yourself? So you can hear. Yeah. So Evgeny is here. Okay, so I guess we will have some useful and insightful comments on his part here. So, great. Actually, at first, I wanted to name this webinar How to Train Critical Thinking Skills. But the more I was thinking about this, the ways of training, the essence of critical thinking, and some other things, so the more I found some things that I do not agree here. And that is why finally I've got this very title, because okay, I will explain a little bit later why. So just how to think and what we can do in order to improve our personal thinking and the thinking of our students and trainees. So please let me just introduce myself because there are some people who are not acquainted yet. So my name is Mikhail Plotnikov. I'm Doctor of Sociology and a professor at High School of Economics and Nizhny Novgorod State University in Russia and University of Bergamo in Italy. I'm also the founder and the dean at a private business school that is called Vaidin's Business School, and we provide mostly corporate training programs and management consulting programs. So, okay, so I think today the most useful thing we can do is just to get acquainted with what is critical thinking and what are the theoretical foundations for critical thinking. And I'm going to provide some ideas and some links to the critical thinking theory and some methodological basis for it. So the next question I'd like to discuss today is whether we really need critical thinking or not, because very often we got used to take this for granted, just like, yes, of course we need critical thinking, but I would rather doubt this, because there are some situations, by the way, very numerous situations, where we actually do not need critical thinking. Let me be just a little bit provocative at this very point. and make a sort of intrigue here. Okay, so then as I watched the questions addressed to me before this seminar, so I saw that some people were interested in my personal experience with critical thinking and training critical thinking skills. So I will tell something on that field. Then we're going to cover the idea how to measure, how to check critical thinking, how to test it, and so on. And then we will focus at some problems, how to train critical thinking. Okay, so if you'd like to add some other questions here, you can write it just as the webinar goes, and I see your comments right now. Or at the very end, we're going to have questions and answer sessions, and you may ask me there. So, all right. I'm sorry, because that is actually my first experience in conducting webinars, so it is not very convenient for me right now, but I'm trying to get used to it. So let's proceed. So the first thing to discuss is what is critical thinking. So I asked you to give your own definition before this webinar, and I had lots of them, so this is what I got from your answers. So you see critical thinking as a sort of approach, specific approach to judge things, to arrange your thoughts, ideas, and so on. The absolute majority of you expressed the opinion that critical thinking is a sort of ability or skill or art that can be learned, trained, and used in some areas or spheres. Some of you defined critical thinking as a process of thinking, process of decision making. Another idea was that critical thinking is a sort of tool we can take and use. And there was even an idea that it is something we don't know, something that enables students to question existence, social order, like a sort of UFO. And you see, to my mind, that is a sort of some pieces of truth. So you are right to some extent, but to my mind, critical thinking is much more than that. And these are just the compound parts of critical thinking. So let me proceed with sort of theory, the foundations of critical thinking, and then revert to this point so that we could formulate so what is critical thinking in the big scope here. So to my mind, the best theoretical background for critical thinking is the methodological and scientific approach of critical rationalism suggested by Karl Raimund Popper. So, of course, critical thinking is much older than any philosophical theory by Mr. Popper. So, and you can find some tests of critical thinking even referred to 1920s. Evgeny said, I think, 1924. Yeah. So the test of critical thinking first. Okay. So, and of course, you can trace this tradition of critical thinking to ancient Greeks like Socrates or Xenophontus and some other ideas. So the phenomenon of critical thinking is very, very old, I guess. So it is the same old as mankind. But the attempts to realize, to conceptualize critical thinking and the foundations of it, I would refer to Sir Karl Raimund Popper. And if you'd like to understand this better, if you are not still aware of these works, I suggest you and I recommend you strongly to get to know, to read at least the 4 works of Karl Popper: The Logics of Scientific Discovery, The Open Society and Its Enemies, Conjectures and Refutations, and Objective Knowledge. I think at least these 4 books cover most the necessary foundations for critical thinking. And to be more exact, more specific, I would like to draw your attention to the 3 specific theories that are going to be very useful for us during this webinar and for you on the way of critical thinking, studies and training. So these are projective theory of knowledge, evolutionary epistemology, and objective knowledge. So let's just have a brief overview for those theories and think what we can do and how we can apply those theories. So the first projective theory of knowledge is an idea of active cognition. So these Popper's ideas are quite well correlated with the ideas of John Dewey, David Kolb, and some other theories of learning, and especially experiential learning. So Popper actually argues the traditional theory of cognition, where a person is a passive actor here, so to say. So that Popper argues that cognition is passive. So he calls the passive approach bucket theory, and because the mind of a person in bucket theory looks like a bucket, and you need just to be open to some ideas of what is happening and just let it flow inside your mind. So Popper believes that is completely wrong, because any cognition, any learning is active, and it is a sort of action and behavior on the part of the person. So if the person is not involved into learning, you cannot actually teach this person anything. Another point here is any cognition is theory-based. You need, and actually you have some theories, some ideas of what is world like, what are the objects like, the situations. So, and those theories become the actual filter for your cognition. You cannot recognize, you cannot see anything that is not presupposed by your theories that are already in your head. So, for example, if I would say just watch, I give you the instruction just watch, this instruction cannot be implemented because you have no idea. So what should be watched? What exactly? Should you watch just right now, just the screen in general, myself here, these things or some other things? So you need some more detailed instructions what to watch. And actually you cannot get anything from here, from this watching, that is not already in your head. So you need some theories. You need to be prepared for cognition. And the last thing here is that our mind uses different kind of heuristics in recognition of general objects. So usually we perceive some pieces of information, and our mind collects them, connects into larger entities, and this is how we get a better idea of what is happening around. But these 3 points lead us to a very important conclusion, that any cognition should be active and prepared. And in order to develop critical thinking, actually this is one of the most important things. You need to develop this prepared active cognition. So your trainees, your students should be prepared to work with information, with the reality, with themselves, and you need to offer them the necessary theories, necessary patterns, ideas, models, so that they could perceive the reality through them, through those filters. In order to see something, they need to have the theory or they need to admit that this ever exists. In order to make our students critical thinking, you need to make them believe that the reality they perceive may be not like it seems. It may be a little bit different or dramatically different, and you need to provide them several tools or patterns or ideas how to perceive this reality. That is the first part of the critical thinking theory, prepared active cognition. The second part, theoretical part, is rooted in Karl Popper's evolutionary epistemology theory. So epistemology is the part of philosophy that studies knowledge and cognition. So Popper actually provided a very versatile and very interesting model for this evolutionary epistemology. That is the source problems that give us the basis for tentative solutions, so trial solutions, and then we put them into action. We face error eliminations, and some of our solutions become not very efficient, and sometimes we refuse them, or sometimes even our wrong solutions lead to our own our mistakes, or sometimes even more dramatic consequences. But anyway, we then face new problems. So problems are actually endless. And problems are the essence of any human existence, or actually of any life existence. If you're alive, you have problems. That is a sort of axiom here. But what is much more important here, to be critically thinking means to realize this consequence, and means to recognize problems, to offer fruitful tentative solutions, to recognize errors and possible error eliminations and correct your activity, and to face new problems. And that leads us to the second very important part of critical thinking, that is reflection and bad theories eliminations. If we need to teach people how to think critically, we need to teach them how to reflect on what is going on, what is happening, or what might happen, and how to recognize bad theories in their minds, and how to eliminate those bad theories and substitute them with better theories. I should point here that there cannot be absolutely excellent theories, absolutely flawless theories. Any theory leads to problems. These are those problems, but this process is endless. Any theory is a sort of representation of reality, but never the reality itself. So this is the way of theories or ideas evolution. And to be critical thinking means to manage this ideas evolution or theory evolution, to make it not just outside flow or something that happens and you don't know why, but to make it manageable. And that is very important thing. So first was prepared active cognition. Second is reflection and bad theories elimination. The third part is also very important. That is the idea of objective knowledge. That is a very sociological idea. So actually, Popper offers a very interesting approach where he differentiates between the three types of reality, and he calls them worlds. World one is the world of physical objects, and the book as a world one object is just paper and paint in there. So that is a physical object. World two is the world of mental objects. That is what is happening inside your head. So a book as a part of world two are all those ideas and images that come to your mind when you're reading a book or just thinking about this book. And world three, which is much more important, that is the world of objective knowledge. That is the world of ideas and theories that exist not only in your head, but so to say, between people. We may call that culture. We may call that interpersonal ideas. This is the world of social institutes, traditions, behavioral patterns, and so on and so on. So what is generated and translated between people? That is the world of social order. Why it is so important for critical thinking? Because a person and individual behavior is inseparable of the society where it takes place or where it exists. So critical thinking is also a part of tradition of thinking. It is also the projection of intellectual standards and tradition of judgment, of reflection, of discussion that exists or does not exist within a specific group. You cannot be just individually critical thinking. You are always a part of groups, different groups, and you are always experiencing the pressure of those groups, and you're reflecting the traditions that you have in those groups. And you may be very, very, so to say, critical thinking individually, but if you are put alone into a group very united and very strong in their tradition and in their actions, so it is a very big question whether you're going to be able to remain critical thinking, because the group pressure is going to be very, very high, and your resistance, as the resistance of any individual, is so to say limited to this group. So if you'd like to make people critically thinking, you also need to establish some strong intellectual standards and establish and support the tradition of critical discussion, of facts, of supporting arguments, and so on and so on. So that is a sort of tradition. So let's sum it up. So critical thinking is based on three theoretical parts. That is prepared active cognition, that is reflection and bad theories elimination, and that is intellectual standards and critical tradition. And these three parts are going to be very useful for us when we are going to discuss the ways how to measure critical thinking and how to train critical thinking. Are there any questions here at this part? Oh, we may proceed. All right. Okay, I see no questions right now. Yeah, you can send your questions anytime you'd like, so I will see them and answer. So that part was very, very theoretical, but then we're going to talk about a little bit more applied things. And then I would like to give you a quotation from Herbert Wells from, I guess, Time Machine. It is a law of nature we overlook, that intellectual versatility is the compensation for change, danger, and trouble. An animal perfectly in harmony with its environment is a perfect mechanism. Nature never appeals to intelligence until habit and instincts are useless. There is no intelligence where there is no change and no need of change. Only those animals partake of intelligence that have a huge variety of needs and dangers. To my mind, that is a perfect quotation that gives you the essence of critical thinking. So first thing is that any thinking is situationally based. So you need to have a specific situation when you need to think. If you don't have those challenges, needs, and dangers, there are no problems around you, you actually don't have an objective need for critical thinking. And it is completely useless trying to give critical thinking to people that do not experience problems. As management consultant, I come across this situation very, very often. So I work with companies trying to make them highly competitive. I'm trying to introduce better solutions, smarter solutions, cheaper solutions, more efficient solutions. But what I see there is that a better solution is demanded only when a company or that company experiences some problems, needs, and dangers. If this is a sort of monopolist or just a state-run and supported company or some other company that exists within the situation with no external dangers, so actually that company has no objective need to be intelligent. And that is why any attempts to introduce better solutions there actually are doomed to fail. They're going to be failed because nobody actually needs that. They may play this efficiency, but they don't have need for efficiency. And that is why they don't have need to think and to be more rational or more critical thinking. So if a person is efficient within his situation or her situation and efficient with the use of typical behavioral patterns, habits, or instincts, or anything else, so this person does not need any critical thinking. Or, as Evgeny offers me, if this person at least believes he is efficient. But that belief actually may exist for long until the error eliminations would not destroy this person or this belief. And that leads us to a very important conclusion, that in order to develop critical thinking, you need to develop both the situations in which a person exists and acts, and the approaches, the mindsets, the behavioral patterns and actions with the use of which this person exists and acts in this situation. So let me systematize this in a small picture. I call this critical thinking levels or iceberg. And here are some important conclusions on what I have just said. So first, thinking is a social phenomenon. Actually, the complexity of human mind and of human intelligence, which is much more, cannot be viewed, recognized, and understood without the society and social conditions within which this person exists. The reflection itself is also the representation of some processes of social interaction, but within the world too, the world of our mental ideas. Thinking as the process and as the result, thinking efficiency is highly affected by the social situation. So training thinking skills starts with providing and understanding the necessary social situations. And what is more important here, a little bit broader conclusion, that thinking is situation determined. So the situation should present some problems or something that can be reflected as problems by this individual or a group. So you cannot train critical thinking without providing specific problems. And that leads us to another conclusion, that you cannot train or learn pure critical thinking without specific application to specific problems or social situations, or just specific problem situations. There is no such thing as the just critical thinking training. You can train critical thinking only applied to some specific situations. You can train specific critical thinking applied to medical science or management or education or some other spheres of application. But it is completely senseless trying to learn or teach critical thinking itself without specific problems. And that is, to my mind, where many trainers of critical thinking fail. They are trying to provide just the theory or just the model without specific application. Then, thinking is language-based. Actually, language is not only the means of communication. Language is also the means to structure the reality, structure our perception, and to operate with those concepts or parts of our perception. And when I'm talking here about language, I mean language in its most broad sense. So that's not only the language of texts, words, phrases, but that leads us to a broader understanding of ontologies, of the world and perception structures. And actually, ontology as the structure of personal mind, or ontology as the structure of interpersonal interaction and communication, is a meta idea for all the critical thinking. It is a sort of interface between a person and the reality. We cannot perceive reality directly. We cannot operate with the reality directly. It is always indirect. It is always through the ontologies we operate. And from this point, critical thinking may be viewed as a specific ontology and as a specific way to use your ontology or treat your ontology or develop your ontology. And that is why it is very useful on the way of learning critical thinking to learn different languages. And I'm not talking only just of the languages like English, Russian, German, or some other ways, but I'm talking also about some specific languages like mind mapping, or like using pictures and scribing and some other ways. So if you use different grammar sets, different concept sets, you become more versatile, more skilled in operating with your ontologies. And you need some language to objectivize your ontologies, to write them down and to work them, to remake them, to correct them. And that work is also a very important part of critical thinking. Chris Argyris called that double loop learning. So some scholars call it the second level of reflection. So that is not only the thinking of what we do, thinking of our actions, but that is what is more important, thinking of our thinking how we think, about how we think, and correcting those ideas. So before act, you need to reflect. So what you are going to do. Before reflecting what you are going to do, or what just during this reflection, you may and need you to ask yourself, so why I'm reflecting like this? So what are the foundations for my reflection, for my thinking this way? And maybe those foundations may be changed. Little bit later, I will show you several exercises or tasks that may be provided for a group or a person in order to make that person think about his or her personal ontologies. But right now, let's just finish this, that thinking is very, very language-based, and you need to use different languages to operate with your thinking. Then, thinking is not always good. That may sound a little bit provocative, but actually the absolute rationality is not the absolute good. There are a lot of situations in our life where we need not to be rational. When it goes about interpersonal relations, like love, friendship, and some other things, so you do not always need to be rational. Sometimes, so you see, actually, the whole world around us is irrational. The society is irrational. As a person, as a specific, each specific person is also irrational. Rationality is a sort of artificial filter that we are trying to apply to the reality, to ourselves, to some other people, so that we could be able to operate with this. Rationality is very good if we need to understand something, systematize, and produce a rational action. But we do not always need those rational actions. More than that, in some situations, rational actions violate tradition. And that tradition, that violation may turn out to be like bad consequences for you. As management consultant, I watched a lot of situations where companies were very inefficient, but they were not experiencing those outside problems of competition, lack of resources, and some other things. So they established some cultures, some tradition inside, and an outside person who was just a novice in that company, who was not agree with those traditions, tried to change something there and was actually acting against specific people, specific interests, specific traditions, and he didn't have enough she didn't have enough power to change something there. And those rational attempts actually led to an extreme unhappiness of that person, to extreme, say, controversy between that person and the company, the job, and so on. So sometimes we need just to accept our irrationality, sometimes even to enjoy this. But here in this webinar, we are talking about the situations of different kind. We are talking about the situations where we need to be rational, where we need to be critical thinking. That is why I'm talking that thinking is not always good, but sometimes it may be very, very useful for all of us. Then, thinking is cannot be taught. You can lead a horse to water, but you cannot make this horse drink. The same with thinking. You can show anything, you can talk about anything to people, but you cannot teach critical thinking. You can you can produce some specific environments for those people to learn critical thinking, but they need to be active on that way. That is the first foundation, prepared active cognition. So that is why if you'd like to teach critical thinking, you need first to abandon that idea that critical thinking may be taught. You need to collaborate with your trainees, with your students on that way. And you need to admit that the speed of this learning and the productivity of that learning does not depend on you, at least directly. It depends greatly on the learner's activity, learner's desire, and learner's specific situations and objective need for critical thinking. But which is more? Thinking can be learned and thinking can be adopted. Here I should say that critical thinking is not just a tool, a skill, or an ability. It should become the part of your actions, of your way of the actions, way of life, a part of your tradition. And that is why we need to talk about this as of something that can be adopted through mutual experience within specific situations. If all people around you think critically and they have this tradition of critical discussion, of rational argument, of correcting themselves and helping some other with rational ideas and structuring ideas, if that becomes a sort of regular tradition or regular social institutes, that can be adopted. If that is not practiced at all around a person, critical thinking becomes just a sort of theoretical object, something that we can talk of, but we cannot adopt. Maybe the main idea and the main purpose for any critical thinking trainer is to create those examples within the situation around a learner and make those examples be analyzed and adopted. And the last thing, I've already mentioned that thinking must have certain applications. And that is why you can actually train critical thinking within specific actions as a way of conducting those actions. It's strictly speaking, it's not about specific tools or specific theories or ideas. That is about, so to say, alternation, personal alternation, or secondary socialization. That is about rebuilding your personality, rebuilding your approaches to treat reality and life. Now let's revert to the pyramid, to the iceberg. At the top of this iceberg, there is the basic level of critical thinking, that is the level of data processing. And when we teach, or when we actually train people to think critically, we train them how to process data. We train them how to treat data that is all around us. And that is why nowadays it is much more actual to learn critical thinking, because nowadays there are much more data around us than during the previous centuries. We live in the world that is overwhelmed with different kind of data, and we need to structure it. If 100 years ago, students have one of the most problem where to get info, how to get new info, new data. The contemporary students do not have this problem because they can Google anything and get about 100,000 links on their requests. The problem now is completely different. What to do with these 100,000 links? How to differentiate between good information and bad information? How to process this data? And that is why here we need to train people how to process, actually how to consume that information. That looks like, say, all-inclusive vacations. You may have an unlimited access to food, but you need to refrain yourself from eating everything and a lot. If you need to take care of your health, you need to think of what you are eating. The same with information. We need to train our children, our friends, colleagues, and ourselves how to treat, how to consume information. Because over-consuming of information or consuming bad information may lead to the same bad results as consuming bad food. But this level is just the top of an iceberg. Even if we can provide the necessary ideas, patterns, and tools how to process information, how to process data, how to consume it and sort that out, how to recognize good and bad information, how to establish interconnections and reason and consequences connections, and so on and so on. Even this is not enough, because having that all in mind, we may be not able to use this in actual action. And that is why we need the second level of critical thinking, that is the level of personal behavior. That is the level how to change your own behavioral patterns, how to change your behavioral habits, how to control your own behavior, how to control yourself, how to stop your habits, your stereotypical actions, to just stop them and start thinking, start creating new patterns and new actions. That is about how to just stop and move another way. And that may be very, very difficult, because many people want to be critical thinking, but very little number of people actually want to change themselves. Everyone wants changes, but just very little number of people want to change themselves. And that is a problem. There is a huge resistance on the part of people to change themselves. And that is why you need to actually let those trainees to go through numerous problem situations where their habits are inefficient, when they face that error elimination, when they have the objective need to develop new ideas and approaches and train new behavioral patterns. Otherwise, when you start talking with people about problems, even serious problems, you may face a very irrational reaction on that. So just let me show a short video on that. It is quite funny, but represents this idea. Okay,
It's just, there's all this pressure, you know? And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me, and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless. And I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there...
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing...
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
No, see, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See, you're
out.
not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just, sometimes it's like there's this achy, I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
That sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Oh, come on. If you would just...
Don't.
Try to see things my way. Do I have to keep on talking till I can go on? We can work it out. We can work it out.
It's just, there's all this pressure, you know? And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me, and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless. And I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there...
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the...
So quite funny. A very good example when the man is trying to provide some rational and critical approaches to deal with the situation, and actually he is operating at the first top level, but he faces an unexpected problem with that this woman operating at the second level actually is not ready to accept that truth or that rationality. And the actual need, her need, is not to solve the problem. Her actual need is a sort of consideration, sympathy, and some other things. So very often we may find that people do not need our rationality, our critical thinking. They need much more consideration, sympathy, and some other things. If we are going to solve problems altogether, that approach is actually not useful. I mean, just besides sympathy and consideration, which are of course important in our life, but beside that, we need some rational approaches. But very often it's not about solving problems. Very often it is about our values, about interpersonal relations, and so on and so on. So working as management consultant, very often I come across the people like that woman. So when I'm trying to talk about problems and how to solve those problems, I find a lot of irrational reactions where people want me just to show sympathy, to understand them, to express some agreement with them, but they don't want to deal with the problem itself and to do anything. But what is more problematic maybe is that we all sometimes behave like that woman from video. We all sometimes become very irrational. And we do not have people around us who may say, hey, just stop doing that and point your attention here, start thinking rationally. Actually, it is we ourselves, those people who need to tell ourselves stop. And that is a very important skill for anyone on the way of mastering critical thinking, is the skill of telling yourself stop. Just stop it. Stop what you are doing. Stop on the way. And maybe one of the most important part of training here on the second level is the training how to stop doing what is irrational, but what is a habit for you, how to stop, how to break the stereotype and turn on your thinking, turn on your critical approach. But that second level is also not the end. There is one more, even deeper level. That is the level of group interaction. As I told you, critical thinking should become the part of tradition. And it should be the part of the way we communicate and interact with the people. So as social psychology studies showed us, we are highly dependent on the groups, on group pressure, on group roles. We show conformity, we show role models, and so on. And that is why individually, just let on our own, we may be very, very critical thinking. Even when operating with tasks or some problems that are written in the paper or that exist only just for us. But when we are trying to act within a group, we are actually involved into that scope of group relations. And that is why the third and very important level of critical thinking is to become a very able communicator and very able social actor, very able leader for many other people, or at least not follower, non-conformist for that. So, do we really need critical thinking? As I told you, not always. Actually, there are a lot of negative consequences, negative sides of critical thinking. So first, critical thinking may be socially disruptive because many social stereotypes and traditions, what is accepted, what many social habits are irrational. And when we are trying to apply a rational approach, a critical approach to that, we are actually disrupting that tradition. And that makes the society and the group become strongly even aggressive against us. So they do not want to accept our rationality very often. So we may spoil our relationships with many people just being very, very critically thinking. That is why you need to apply critical thinking actually whenever you want, but you need to be aware of those consequences that not everybody is ready to accept your critical thinking. The second thing is that critical thinking may be inefficient in routines. So just as any thinking, you see, of course, anything may be implemented in a way cheaper, faster, more efficient, but you do not need actually, you don't have the need to change this always. There are a lot of things that we got used to, and we operate there with just our habits. That is very quick and very, very simple for us. You can rationalize anything, but actually it would take time. Thinking is time-taking, thinking is resource-taking, so you need to spend sometimes a lot of time and a lot of effort to think how to make something better. If that is about long-term efficiency, of course, it is a good idea. But if it is about routines, very often you just need to let them go, because an action implemented very often is much more important than a very, very good idea, but still not implemented. Just make your action at least good, but make it, instead of thinking of how to develop an excellent idea, but not eventually doing anything. Critical thinking actually leads us to a disabling regression, because actually, in order to act, you need to believe. You need to believe, you need to have specific beliefs that describe your picture of reality, your understanding of reality, and those beliefs are the basis for any action. But critical thinking actually argues many of those beliefs. And you see that argument, those questions to those beliefs, that questioning may be actually endless. You can question anything, and you may fall to this endless regression, stop believing anything and stop acting. And that would lead you to just endless doubting everything without doing anything. And actually, you need to find your personal balance. To which extent you need still to doubt, or where you need to stop doubting and start acting. And to my mind, there is no specific solution for that, and that is the solution that each person takes for himself or herself. Critical thinking emerges responsibilities. When you want to change something with your critical thinking, you automatically accept your responsibility for those changes. And as we talked, many people do not want those responsibilities and agree just following the irrational or not efficient ways of action just not to be responsible. And sometimes you even may choose not to be responsible. That is quite normal. And sometimes critical thinking may lead you to individual loneliness, because many things in our interpersonal relations are not rational. So being critical thinking in everything especially what tackles the people around you, may make those people dislike you and may turn you to become alone, because people would not be able to accept you. That is not, of course, the only possible outcome for critical thinking, but that is something we should be aware of. These are negative sides of critical thinking. But I say yes to critical thinking just because of the positive outcomes here, because critical thinking is actually the only way of managed social evolution. For many centuries, the last centuries, human beings evolve mainly not with their bodies, but mainly with their behavioral patterns and social interaction patterns. Our evolution now is mainly social and extracorporeal, outside of our body, than biological. I mean, the speed of those two types of evolutions is very, very different. So using critical thinking is a way to develop necessary qualities for any individual or any group. And that is actually also one of my approaches for management consulting. When I'm trying to make an organization more efficient, I understand that I need to make this organization evolve from the inefficient condition to something more efficient, applied to the specific environmental market conditions, specific set of people, and so on and so on. So, and we may use this critical thinking to make this change fast and efficient. Critical thinking is very good for long-term efficiency because it prevents you from many problems, even dramatic problems, dramatic mistakes. Critical thinking makes you think about your values, about something you need to doubt and something you should not doubt. And actually, values is something we live without critical understanding. We just believe in that. We just have it as the parts of our personalities. And if we do not want to doubt it, probably that is your value. And critical thinking actually leads you to recognition of your values. Critical thinking is the sign of intellectual maturity for many people. Nowadays, we have a lot of people that are called kidults. So they're kidults. They may look like adults, but they behave like kids. And a lot of people abandon, actually, or do not even gain intellectual maturity, personal responsibility, rational thinking, and so on and so on. Our mass culture actually provides a lot of conditions for that. But if you need just to get out of that flow of mass culture and mass immaturity and start and become an independent thinker and independent and efficient actor, you need to cultivate that intellectual maturity in yourself and your environment. And this may lead you to the previous 3 points. And which is more, critical thinking is the basis for ideas exchanging and for creating some communities of the like-minded people. And that our webinar is actually one of those communities right now. Yeah. So what do I do with critical thinking? And what actually any person may do with critical thinking? First of all, of course, that is practice. So critical thinking needs a lot of practical applications. And for me, that is management, that is consulting, that is entrepreneurship, that is training, and so on and so on. So I'm trying to make those things more efficient, more rational. I'm trying to achieve better results with less resources and less time. So, and critical thinking helps me in that. I propagate critical thinking for more than 10 years now. I'm conducting some trainings in, not actually in critical thinking. I would say I inbuilt the critical thinking approaches to my courses. Being a professor of sociology and management, I'm teaching students, and I'm teaching in business schools. So, and I'm teaching my students to treat the reality critically. And which is more, I think, I'd rather don't teach them specific patterns. I give them the example of what I'm doing, or the example of my approach is to the things we discuss and we learn. And through this, I help them to adopt this critical thinking approach. And through this, I inspire them to question the reality, to question themselves, and do something different, make a difference. I'm also a critical thinking researcher, and I conduct several experimental research studies on how the use of visual ontologies affect critical thinking, or how to improve critical thinking within a multicultural group, and some other things. So if you've got some interest in joining this research or conducting some joint research on critical thinking, you may just write me, and I think we will have some opportunities for that. But which is more, what do I do with critical thinking? I just live. And that is, I think, for everybody, because critical thinking is not just a tool, an ability, or skill. That is a way of living. That is a way you treat reality. That is a way for everyday cognition, for acquiring and processing new data, for treating other people and yourself. That is a sort of lifestyle and a sort of philosophy. So, and if you'd like to be aware, if you'd like to be rational, if you'd like to forecast the consequences of your actions and to find the best solutions, so you need to be critical thinking. But I don't think critical thinking is inseparable from a person. Just, yeah, probably just a way of thinking. Another question you asked me is how to measure critical thinking. So you see, as far as critical thinking is a very complex object, so there are a lot of ways to measure different aspects of critical thinking. But I'm sure that the critical thinking as a whole cannot be measured. It is too complex right now. But you may measure different aspects of this. So just first, let me remind you the three major aspects. That is prepared active cognition, that is reflection and bad theories elimination, and that is intellectual standards and tradition. And these are the three things that you can measure within any group or any activity. So you can measure whether a person is prepared or not prepared for any specific data processing. That is just like pre-tests we do for school children or for students or for some other people, just in order to understand whether they are ready or not to understand, to learn new things, to operate within the specific environments. So the pre-tests help us to know whether this person is ready or not for specific activities. Reflections and bad theories eliminations can also be measured. So, and we need to measure the specific actions here, the specific ways people treat the problems. And actually, that is mostly referred to the level of personal behaviors. So, and here it is useless just to ask a person, because we need more to watch a person within the specific action or specific problem or process of problem solving. So give a person a problem and watch what a person is going to do within this problem. Then you will see how critical this person is. And the second level is, or the third level is intellectual standards and tradition here, and you may watch only the group. And it is also completely senseless to ask an individual here, are you prepared for operating within a group, or are you going to be critically thinking within a group? It is senseless because actually any person is affected by a social situation, and when even a critically thinking person gets to that situation, these specific behavior and interaction patterns change. So in the slide, you can see this table, and I just give you some hints for that. So if you need to measure data processing, and you need to measure so what ideas and attitudes a person has, you may just ask that person and use tests here. That is, I think, the most proper area for tests. But if you need to measure behavior, to measure patterns of data processing, so how a person is actually acting, interacting with data, you need to give the task and check, and it is senseless to ask or give a test here. Then, if you'd like to test specific tools, the use of specific tools and strategies, you also need to give a set of tasks and trace whether this person follows those strategies and tools or not. If you need to measure behavioral patterns, the first and simplest way here is just to talk to a person and watch what are the exact behavioral patterns expressing the ideas and attitudes here. Or also you may give some tasks and then talk to a person asking what is your approaches, what are your approaches, and why you choose your behavior here, or why you choose to behave like that. And that is all. So, but if you need to test group interaction, you actually need to involve that group into a group discussion and see the group dynamics, because the group may follow the critical way or abandon this critical way and show something like groupthink or like total conformity and so on. So discuss, actually initiate this discussion, lead this discussion, or join this discussion and watch here. And of course, the best way to test the group is to provide a sort of specific simulation, problem situation simulation, where you can see the actual group interaction, actual behavior patterns, actual data processing approaches, and so on and so on. But unfortunately, the critical training right now is actually in the very beginning of this way, and those tasks and tests are not very numerous, and we need to find them just one by one from our colleagues, from the internet, from some other ideas. So I will show you just in a couple of minutes some tasks, maybe you will use them. But here are actually three main ideas, three key ideas for developing your measurement instruments or approaches. I would like you to think about them. So first is, there is no objective absolute standard of critical thinking. So there is no golden standard of critical thinking. Critical thinking is a sort of approaches, ontologies, as I said, interfaces, and they are different, they are various, they are numerous. And if you are going just to introduce a sort of standard of this kind, actually you will betray the initial idea of critical thinking, the idea of freedom. The idea that any person is free on his way of finding rational and efficient solutions. Trying to correlate any pattern of action with a golden standard actually is not critical at all. It is a sort of dogmatic ideas. So, and never try to use those absolute standards, because this way you would transform critical thinking to dogmatic thinking. The second idea I would like to notice is that any measuring here leads to changing. When you are trying to measure the level of critical thinking, when you ask questions, when you give some tasks and exercises, you actually involve people into some problematic problem situations where they need to apply their thinking. You increase the level of problems around the people, and that is why you provoke the development of critical thinking. That looks like famous Hawthorne experiments in management when in Western Electrics, Elton Mayo tried to measure the influence of, I guess, light for light intensity for the job productivity. So, and when people tried to measure this, each time they got the increase in productivity. Finally, they got that even the just the mere attention to the people doing simple jobs was the stimulation of their efficiency. So the measuring itself led to changing. And maybe say actual changes are much more important than measuring itself. So measuring should not become the obsessive idea. Actually, the main idea, the main purpose of critical thinking is change and efficient action. So if a person is acting efficiently, if a person shows the ability to change and a good progress in change, then this person is critically thinking enough for the change, enough for that efficiency. And this is much more important than measuring itself. That is just like dealing with risks. An absolute majority risk management should not be led to the idea of measuring risks. Okay, you can measure that this or that risk event is just 1%, but if this still would happen, it would not help you believe in that, oh, that was a very, very rare situation and we had only 1% of this probability, but it still happened. What are you going to do next? So probably the most important thing in risk management is to be prepared for that, to do something in order to prevent this risk event and to have something to do when risk event still happens. The same with critical thinking. You may do something in order to provide some critical thinking as a way of action, and you may do something when you have that inefficiency and when you may undergo some procedures or exercises or tasks in order to increase the level of your critical thinking. And that is much more important than trying to measure in detail the exact number or level of critical thinking. So that is my approach. But still, as for the methods, you may use a variety of them. You may use tests, interviews, problem tasks, activities, simulations. And if you understand the theory, if you understand the exact options, what you are going to measure, mindsets, behavioral patterns, group practices, and so on, it is not very difficult to formulate those questions or those tasks. I personally use tasks from courses of logics or psychology or some other ideas. Nowadays, there are a lot of popular tasks translated, just transmitted through Facebook or Twitter or some other faces. Actually, any situation may become an exercise or a test. It is not about the exercise. It is about you, what you can recognize within that exercise. So let us proceed to probably the most interesting part here is how to train critical thinking. And here the main answer should be correlated with the formula I gave you, Popper's evolutionary epistemology formula, that is initial problems that leads to tentative solutions or trial solutions, then leads to error eliminations, and then to new problems. And that is why what we need to do in order to train critical thinking is, one, solve tasks and problems. And you need to involve people into solving those tasks. You need to make people provide several conjectures on those task solving, identify the reasons and the structure of those problems. And sometimes you need them even to identify the problems. As Evgeny said, sometimes people believe they're efficient, there is no problem, but it exists. And we need to teach people, to train people to recognize problems with the use of numerous problem tasks. The second thing is to practice it in everyday activities. And here, as I said, the main thing is to learn how to interrupt the habit or common action or stereotype and realize it, formulate the problem here, analyze the problem, structure the situation, structure your own actions, invent new action, and act. For some of my students, for example, I give a sort of recommendation. So in order to practice this in everyday life, just choose anything, any activity that is a sort of habit for you. For example, when you brush your teeth, so you've got a toothbrush, and for example, you got used to handle it in your right hand, this toothbrush. Just think about a very simple thing that next time when I'm going to brush my teeth, I'm going to take it into my left hand, not the right hand, but left hand. So that seems very simple. But in the absolute majority of cases, people just forget doing this. So then they're brushing their teeth, going away, and then maybe they recall, oh, I wanted to have it in my left hand, but that is, I didn't do this. Why? Or sometimes you take this, you're going to brush it, and say, oh, stop. I wanted to do this with my left hand. Okay, and you interrupt your action and you take it into your left hand and do this just like you thought. You have thought previously. So you may practice this in many typical situations, many habits in everyday life. But the most thing you need here to learn from here is the feeling of interrupting your habit. And when you become able to interrupt your habits, that is the first step for your being critically thinking in everyday life. When you give tasks, when you receive tasks for yourself, so first what you need to do is to interrupt your stereotypical action, is to interrupt your desire to act right away. Just say yourself, stop, think first, think before you act. That is very important here. And the second level of critical thinking training is changing group tradition. And here you cannot work just with a separate person, just with one person. You need to work with the group as a whole, with the organization, with the team. And you need to provide a very versatile problem-based vision for that group. So what we are doing, what problems we are facing, why this is a problem for us, so what we're going to do with this. Then you need to establish communication channels for that group and procedures. So how we can communicate with each other, how we can share our ideas, how we can, what procedures we can use in order to discuss our ideas, to express our opinions, and to find better solutions. But in order to support these procedures, you need to establish specific discourses and social institutes. A discourse is necessary here to support the tradition. An institute here is also necessary to formalize the tradition. So if critical thinking procedures and approaches becomes a part of group traditions, actually it is a new person or even an existing member has almost no way for being not critical. You have to be critical because everything around you is organized according to critical thinking. So how to create learning environments for critical thinking? As I said, it is the most important not to teach critical thinking, but to create the specific environment where a person may learn to be critical or critically thinking. Here you can see the typical David Kolb's experiential learning consequence with actions, reflections, conceptualizations, and experiencing. So I just changed several words, but the idea here is just the same. You need to provide specific problem situations, and you need to help people face the problem and recognize that problem. And this is the basis for people to ask questions, to start asking questions. If your students do not have problems or do not recognize the problem, it is very difficult for them to start asking questions. They have no reason or no basis for that. When they start asking questions, that is the basis for the next step for analysis. You need to analyze the problem situation, your own actions. You need to understand the structure of the situation, of action, of solution. You need to understand what is there in the situation, what are the parts, what are the relations. And that is the necessary basis to suppose what should be changed, what needs to be changed. And that leads to the conjectures, to the presuppositions, what can a possible solution be. When you have some possible solutions, some presuppositions, you need to act, to put that solution into actions, and then provide specific trial and error process. Implement your action, analyze the feedback, check whether the outcomes you actually received are the same outcomes you forecasted. And then you will have those outcomes, and you will have the new problems and the new situations that are going to be the result of your changed action. Actually, helping people to learn critical thinking is creating that cycle for them and helping them realize each step of the cycle and establish rational connections between the parts of this. So let me now just show you several exercises or several activities for training of this kind. I would like to start with one of my probably favorite thing is the task with 4 points. So you probably know the very popular task with the 4 points, when there are 4 points that are the tops of a square, and you need to connect them with the 3 lines without taking your hand off, so that you could have a solid figure out of that. So people who are not aware of that problem, of that task, so many of them are trying to do something within those 4 points, believing that these should be the tops of the figure they need to get. But the only solution here is to recognize that there is a wider context, something outside of that point, of those points, and then when you are able to go outside, you may have several solutions out of that. So that is quite simple, and that is quite popular. But I personally like a little bit more complex and deep tasks. So you may do this right now, just as you see it, where you see it. So just draw the 4 points that are the tops of a square, and the task is to connect all the four points just with the 2 lines, just 2 lines, without taking your hand off. Connect the 4 points with the 2 lines without taking your hand off. Of course, direct lines. So many people find this almost impossible. They say, well, we cannot do this. So, for example, if we do it like this and that, so we cannot cover the fourth point. If they're trying to do something like this and then here and here, I say that is 4 lines actually, 4 strokes, not the 2 lines. And many of them find it, they say, impossible. But then, I generate a sort of problem for them. They face this problem. They see they cannot do anything, so their habits and their stereotypical actions are not useful for that. And they experience a sort of confusion and a sort of helplessness. They experience the objective necessity for new approaches. And that is where we can start learning thinking critically. Then I help them to know just a very simple pattern for that. I give them a small hint. So I say, if you say it is impossible within your way of thinking. In order to change your way of thinking, you need to think about 3 ways, 3 points, 3 things. First thing is the context. Each situation, each task is not just on its own. It exists within a specific context. And within this context, there are some other people, resources, qualities, and some other things. Okay, let me just enumerate them, and then I will show you what to do with this and how to apply this. The second thing is that you use specific methods and tools in order to solve your task. Methods and tools. And maybe the methods and tools you are using are not proper, not suitable for this situation. Try to change the methods and tools you are using. And number 3, maybe the problem is within your interpretation. Maybe the problem is not here, but the problem is just in your head, in how you understand this situation. So let me show you how to apply this. So the first, context. And within the context, you can find some other resources. So these resources, for us, that is our pens, pencils, or markers we use. So it is very easy to connect all those 4 points if you just take another pen or another marker. Just look, 1 and 2, and that is all. So who said you need to do this just with 1 marker? There are some other resources. Or there are some other people. I've got Evgeny here. Evgeny, could you please come up here? So could you please use this pencil? Just repeat this line. And I'm going to repeat this line. And you see, we're a perfect team. We can do this all together, and we solve this task. Oh, there is something more. There are some qualities of the object or the objects that had not been documented. They were not just in the text of the task, but they exist in the reality. And here we can see that we use paper here. And one of the qualities of paper that we can fold it. So it is very, very easy to do something like this and use just 2 lines to connect all the 4 points. Sometimes you do not need to take the situation for granted. You may change the situation that so that you can solve your task. That is all about context. Use your context more actively. Think about it, the context. Then, number 2, that is methods and tools. So we use lines for that. Lines. But Okay, I can connect the 4 points with 2 direct lines and 1 indirect. I used 2 lines for that connection. And I did not have the limitation that I should not use the indirect lines. Or we may use the, say, bigger lines, more thick or thicker lines. So you see, a mathematical line has no width, no thickness, but graphical line has it. So if I use a very, very thick paintbrush, for example, I can have the 2 strokes of this kind and just paint the 4 lines, the 4 points. Or if I've got just the marker of this kind, I may reinterpret and change the initial condition. So let me place the 4 points very, very close to each other. So you see, very small, close to each other, so that the thickness of the line for the marker is enough to connect them. Or if you use a pen, sometimes it marks when you touch it. So you can draw just 1 line, then fold the paper and have this line printed just mirror-like. What else? So next, that is interpretation. So the interpretation is usually connected with the interpretation of goals or conditions. The first, the interpretation of goals. So why do we need to connect the 4 lines, the 4 points? If these are just electrical points and we need to construct an electric chain, so we may use the electricity conductive material for that and make the 4 points, and they're going to be all connected all together, and you would not need any lines at all. You reach the same purpose, the same goal, but without using the instruments or ways you've been suggested. Or my favorite one, you need to interpret the limitations, and the limitation without taking your hand off. Okay, why not? Just look, 1, 2. I haven't taken my hand off. I didn't have the exact prescription which hand of this. And that is all. So you see, just this small short exercise lets us show the students, lets them experience the inefficiency of their habits and their regular way of thinking. It provides some ideas where to find critical solutions. It also provides some positive experiences that what had been suggested, what had been told is not just a theory, it works, and it is quite visible how we can apply this. And of course, after that, usually I give some situational problem tasks connected with management or social relations or something else, where we can use the same theory. We can find some other context variables, some other methods and tools, some other contexts, or some other interpretations, and apply them to the situation. When they use the same pattern through a new situation, new analysis, new conjectures, and new trials, so they take this as a part of their own personalities. If you repeat this cycle for many times, actually this inbuilds your critical thinking in their mindsets, in their behavioral patterns, in their ways they interact with other people. And through this, we can build better critical thinking societies, groups, and behaviors. So our time is now over. I can provide you also several useful links and resources where you can find a lot of interesting information on what is critical thinking and how to teach and train critical thinking. So that is Critical Thinking Skills by Cottrell. So here you can find some patterns for analysis and argument and some exercises. A very good book by Scott Klaus, The Psychology of Judgment and Decision Making. And here are also different tasks and a very detailed analysis of why and how people answer for those tasks and how they just what kind of strategies of thinking and judgment they have and how to change this. And the two books from the same series, Critical Thinking Skills.
They are really trained.
Actually, the two last things, Critical Thinking Skills Success in 20 Minutes and Reasoning Skills Success in 20 Minutes, are ready-made trainings, so you can just take and conduct them. So, and of course, if you are not still aware, criticalthinking.org is, I think, the Bible for any critical thinker. So, probably right now we need to stop the main part of our webinar, and I would be more than happy to answer your questions if you've got some. I'll just see your feedbacks on that. You're welcome. Yeah, you can print them if you got some.
Thank you very much.
No questions for
No
now.
questions.
So you can see my email. You may write anything, so any questions, ideas here, or you may find me on Facebook. So I'll be glad to continue our discussion, and I'll be glad to answer your questions. So thank you. And that is the email of Evgeny Volkov. And I should also express many thanks to Evgeny, because I guess more than 10 years ago, he infected me with this idea. Yeah, and I was truly fascinated with this whole world of critical thinking. And nowadays, I just cannot imagine my life, my actions, my job without using critical thinking. And I say many thanks to Evgeny Volkov and the enthusiasts of the kind that propagate critical thinking. To my mind, that is a very, very good and useful way to make our everyday life better. So thank you so much. If you have no questions, so I finish for now, and looking forward to your questions to my email on the Facebook. So see you.